Individually, I don't think we had an intro. This is our intro panel. Okay, this is the intro slide. Individually, I am known as Malindachan on social media.
I take TurtleSmithy as the cosplay name as well.
He's just trying to make it easier to find our shop and whatnot. He used to go by EX Shadow, but we've recently, in the past year, rebranded his cosplay stuff to be after the business. So this panel is about, so it's turning cosplay into a career. Whoever decided to make the programming decided to rename it as actually making money, and people seem to like that, so we'll probably rebrand our panel to this new title. Basically, we're going to talk about the fact that we are full-time self-employed cosplayers and how we do it and how you could do it too. All right, so the first question is what kind of cosplayer are you? And I feel like at this specific event, there's a lot of big majority of creators, people who are making costumes. They want maybe to focus on the creative part as an artist to move forward with cosplay. Is there anything you want to talk about our little pie chart? Not pie chart?
Yeah, so there's different circles that have a bit of overlap, different categories that we typically fall into as cosplayers. A lot of us here are going to be on the crafting side. And that's what we started with and still love to do the most. But you'll see a lot of people out there who focus a little more on like the modeling aspects. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people who do a lot of personality. They do streaming. Some of them do voice work now as well. And some voice actors used to be cosplayers. Some voice actors become cosplayers. You know, there's a lot of interweaving between those.
So we're going to go individually on kind of what to expect, how each cosplayer is going about their business. So with crafters, you've got a lot of variety happening, but a lot of times you're going to see people who maybe have an Etsy shop. Maybe they have their own website where they sell merchandise of some kind, or they sell full costumes. It doesn't always mean that they're doing a full costume commission. Maybe they specialize in wigs, or they specialize in props, or things like that. You can find people who will do the whole thing. They'll do a full-on costume commission, or maybe they'll work with a team of people, and they'll like have different parts of people in their workshop doing the different aspects of the costume. Some popular examples are Amazon Mandy. She does full costume commissions. Her specialty is mostly sewing. She mostly will do like sewing-based costumes, but she's also not a stranger to making armor and things like that. But usually maybe as far as things like wigs goes, maybe she would have her client refer to someone else. There's also, like, you'll have cosplayers who make resources and tutorials. They sell digital items that will help other cosplayers, like patterns. And so, like, you've got Kinpatsu Cosplay, who has a lot of resources available in her shop. She'll have tutorials and patterns that you can buy. I actually bought her Dark Magician Girl pattern to do the hat and the boots for my own costume. Saved me so much time than having to do it myself. You've got Dangerous Ladies, who they sell a lot of like accessories and things that like maybe can enhance a costume. Let's say you're not even a full cosplayer, or maybe you don't work in a workspace that allows you to have all the tools you need for every part of your costume. Maybe you only have the time and energy to do one kind of crafting. You don't really, maybe you dread doing wigs, or you dread doing something else. But like Dangerous Ladies, they focus a lot on like models that you can download and print on a 3D printer, or also kits. If you don't even have the means or space for a 3D printer, they can even get those things for you. You can buy a costume, like a cheap costume, and you can enhance, like sometimes those pre-made costumes, maybe the fabric part's fine, but maybe the accessories have a bit to be desired, and you just want to spruce it up to make it your own. You could add those elements into your costume to make it look amazing. Do you want to add any more to the crafting part, or do you want to take over on the next slide? Okay, so the next one is the model cosplayer.
Yeah, so there's a lot of model cosplayers out there, and it takes a lot of work to do that in a different sense. You've got a lot of people like Johnny, who does a lot of physical weightlifting and training. These days he's into Muay Thai a lot, but he puts a lot of his time and effort into keeping a good physique, and that gets him a lot of gigs that show off that physique. So like in the picture, he's doing Goku. He's done stuff with Capcom for like Street Fighter games. He gets a lot of gigs. Johnny's also kind of an enigma. He's like an engineer, and he's got a lot of money, but he also does really good crafting himself, and he does physical, so he's kind of everything.
I was going to say, we're going to go into these examples of cosplayers too, where maybe this isn't also even their full income. Like,
Yeah.
he's an engineer as his day job. He just does this on the side to make a little extra money, but he doesn't need cosplay to sustain himself.
Yeah, but he also has kind of a hustle mindset. So like he's pretty good at finding gigs with like game companies. So he'll do promotions with them, and he likes to organize those as well. So like he's not always doing everything, but he's good at doing a lot of things. So it's pretty cool. But that's not necessarily what you have to worry about if you're a model with cosplay. Like a lot of times, models will just be the model. Like they have another team of people making the costume for them to wear, and it's just up to them to present the character at a booth space or for a photo shoot or for a video. There can be a little bit of persona going on with that, a little bit of role play. That definitely helps if you're a model. Know the character at least enough to kind of pull it off and immerse people who are coming up to the booth or something. That kind of overlaps with the persona part of cosplay.
I was going to say, like, a lot of times you'll get model cosplayers who get a lot of photo shoots, and they'll have prints that is, in its own way, its own art, and they will sell prints as a means of making some money. There are other platforms that I won't necessarily go into because it's a family-friendly panel, but like, there's platforms where they'll sell 18-plus content, and that, I know there's a big market there, and there's where some people make some good money, but it's really something that a lot of cosplayers is like, maybe does something they're not comfortable with. It's not something I'm personally comfortable with, so I don't go in that area, but I still highly respect the people who do, because that's a big sacrifice to have to make, because you do have to consider, like, if you wanted certain gigs with certain companies, they may not be able to work with you if such as Disney and Marvel, they actually will not work with cosplayers who have like OnlyFans accounts or have any of that kind of content. So just kind of keep that in mind before you dive right into something like that.
It's also worth mentioning that I know people can be concerned about either your age or your body type with modeling, and that's not necessarily like a make or break scenario. Like we know plenty of people of all different sizes and shapes and colors and ages, and they all still pull it off really well.
I do have a little thing on each slide about your target market. Who are you selling who you are to? And with models, a lot of times it's people brands or companies that are hiring cosplayers to be a model for their booth, but also people who just enjoy viewing cosplay, people who like to buy prints and collect prints that are of their favorite character. Like, oh, I love how this cosplayer portrayed my favorite character. I want to buy that print. Earlier when I was just talking about crafter, their target market is fellow cosplayers, people who are going to use your resources, or also people who just want to dress up, but they don't have the means of making the costumes themselves. But the next slide is personality. And this kind of especially goes hand in hand a lot of times with the model thing. If you're modeling for a company, you have to be able to talk to their potential clients about the game that you're doing. These are people who can have social skills, and they can easily talk to people, but it also encompasses people who fit certain demographics that maybe you relate to. Like there's tons of cosplayers, like So Twinpools is a trans cosplayer, and they are especially known. He's especially known for his transitioning and his story for that, and helping new cosplayers who maybe have the same kind of background or interest in discovering themselves and how to go about proceeding in that path in life. And but you also got all kinds of entertainers and things like that, people who are, show people who can perform drag or just funny skits, things like that. You've got TikTok is so big now. That's huge in terms of the personalities, people who are putting on performances for their audience and getting interest. But it's a huge, there's so many different diverse kinds of people in this category, and your favorite may be someone who you connect with the most, who's someone who feels relatable to you. Target market is people who enjoy entertainment or seek guidance.
To a degree, like we have to put on a personality when we're doing presentations like this, and like that's actually a really good way to wet your feet on something like that. If you're not sure like what kind of person or persona you want to have in a community, like it doesn't hurt to try hosting panels to see what your social skill level is, get some practice in talking, because like we didn't really talk very well in public in the early days when we first started doing panels. We would get pretty clammed up and just kind of stumble over words, and like nowadays we don't really have to worry about it as much.
When I had to take a public speaking course in college, I was terrified. I'm fidgeting constantly. I'm stumbling over my words. And this hobby has forced me to come out of that box and try to be a little more smooth with how I speak. And I mean, this is at least, 10 years of, so I feel like I'm very comfortable now with that. And I still stumble. I'm not perfect, but it's definitely something where it's kind of forced me into doing that to be a teacher. But that goes into there too. If you want to be an educator, it's worth trying to like come to cons like this and maybe signing up to do a panel and getting that experience to help you be able to do more.
Yeah. Even if you don't want to do panels, just getting into your character. When you're cosplaying, you just see how much you want to perform as the character. That can give you an idea of whether or not that's something that you want to pursue more. If you're the type to be pretty quiet, just take photo and then move on, there's nothing wrong with that. Like people still like to dress up just for the costume itself. Not everybody feels like getting into character, and there's different levels of it.
All right, and I mean, going into like the whole money making thing, there's like a lot of different avenues for like whether you're a Twitch streamer or a YouTuber, there's video revenue that comes in from some of those platforms. If you're doing TikTok, I don't know exactly, I'm not as versed on TikTok, but I know there are people who make a living off of their TikTok, whether that gets them places or if it's, they have this shop feature now where they can sell things and whatnot. So there's all kinds of places there. It's just a matter of sometimes it really boils down to luck, but we're going to get there in a moment. Versatility, though, is success. Typically, even with those previous slides of examples that we gave, a lot of those cosplayers are doing what they are doing potentially full-time because not just one aspect, it's potentially multiple things that they're doing. Some of the most well-known, successful cosplayers that you know that are making a living are doing all of those things. Of course, Yaya Han is the most, successful, I'd say, cosplayer in the U.S. from how much she does in terms of her brand with, fabrics, going to shows as an either a representative, as like an MC or as a judge. She's got her own shop where she sells like the cat ears and things like that, and she sells prints. She's doing just about everything, and that's how she's so successful. Stella Chu does the same. She has a workshop. She's got a team. They make costumes for companies all the time. Kamui Cosplay, she's especially more well-known because of her books and her education as a personality, but she's also doing the things like gigs for companies and crafting costumes. That's what got her there. So what are we, TurtleSmithy, our business? So we've been making, as a hobbyist, we've been making cosplays for about 20 years.
We worked for Art of Wigs for 8 years up in Chicago, and then towards the end of it, we decided we wanted to take a step into our own business. I started it as a side business on Etsy. I started with like Final Fantasy XIV geared racial features from like the Aura dragon people and like the cat people, the Mikote. Now we have the rabbit people, Vieira, and we're slowly starting to branch out into other categories as well. But I got more experience into like mold making and casting, so that's like really helped me kind of diversify into like a more industry level quality of product, and that's where we're at right now, just kind of experimenting.
So, like, our primary income is on the crafter side. We have an Etsy shop, and most of what we make is coming from our store and the accessories we sell. Sometimes when things are tight, I'll open up, like, wig commissions for my friends or something to help make ends meet, because unfortunately, there's, like, a busy season. There's, when the cons pick up in the spring, like, starting around KatsuCon, it picks up and elevates through, like, Anime Expo, and then sometimes it kind of dies off. Like, usually our slow season begins in July, so it picks up again for Halloween, and then it dies again for the holidays, mostly because our price point is usually a little higher. So, like, it's good to actually have what our friend calls fluff money, where you have some products that are maybe cost $20. Those are great Christmas items. You know, people are not as inclined to pay big dollars on a high money thing when they're already trying to save money to buy gifts for friends and family. So it's been a learning experience to kind of see.
Impulse buying.
Impulse. Yes. What can you make that is an impulse buy? But like so like that's our primary income, and it's still, like, again, you know, we've been doing this full time at this point for only a few years, so it's still a learning process for us. But we additionally, as personalities, sometimes we get hired by conventions to come out and speak with you guys. Sometimes, like, mostly, a lot of times it's not necessarily making us money. We're like, we'll have a small appearance fee that kind of ends up covering, like, if things that maybe the con doesn't cover. Like, you know, sometimes we ask for a per diem to make sure we have food, you know, your transportation, your hotel. Ultimately, you don't want to be in a hole if you're doing this kind of thing. Obviously, when you're just starting out and you're, like, trying to get out there to do that, you kind of do have to spend some money on your end to, like, get yourselves to the con. They may not necessarily be willing to pay your way until you've proven yourself as a reliable guest.
Something that really helps on our end, because we don't have, like, huge numbers. We have, like, fairly good numbers on our social media, but we don't, like, push it super hard. And there's always, like, a luck factor with numbers on social media. So, like, what we go for instead is connections and professional standards. So, like, we make sure that if we do a gig, we are always on time or early. We always, like, we save the dirty language for when we know people are okay with that, and then we use professional, like, speaking skills for the rest of the time.
I was gonna say, you know, obviously don't drop any bad words during your panels at a family-friendly event.
Don't come drunk.
Yes, don't come in hungover. Like, you can have a good time in the evening when you're off the clock, but don't let that affect your performance for your audience.
And also just keeping a good attitude, whether it's real or fake. If you can at least make everyone else believe that you have a good attitude, like, it's important. It's part of that personality, you know? Like, I do get grumpy. I have a temper sometimes, but I don't show it very often in public because it's important for people to like me, you know? And it's definitely a part of the job. But it's also good to just, like, have that mindset. You know, like, if you can, like, convince yourself that you're having a good time, like, it really goes a long way in a career where you're in public and doing presentations and showing off your craft.
I mean, just also even to the staff, be reasonable, don't be a diva. They won't want you back if they don't like dealing with you.
Yeah,
so
be flexible, be chill. Like, I've had my Adderall, I'm good for the day.
So we technically sell prints, so we kind of fit in the model category, but it's not our main income. It's mostly, like, people who've been following us for a long time might stop by to say hi at the table, maybe support us, they'll buy a print, you know. So we have stuff like that, but that's not our main income. That's not what we rely on.
Yeah. No, I think the main reason why we have been pretty successful all these years is because, one, we do know craftsmanship. We definitely know how to make cool costumes and tell other people how to make them. But two, we like making friends with people. I love people. I think everyone here is fascinating in some way or another, and I like to find out about why. You know, I think it's really cool to meet people and just learning about other people's experiences, and that goes a long way towards making connections. Friendships go a long way. Like, we've gotten a lot of our gigs at shows from knowing the people that run the shows and making friends with them, and they talk about how good of an experience they had having us at those shows, and then we get other gigs. You know.
So probably one of the biggest questions or biggest dreams I think a lot of cosplayers have is like, I would really love to do something for my favorite video game company. Like, how cool would it be to do something officially for Nintendo, to craft something officially for Square Enix, whether that's modeling or just making something for them. And honestly, so when it comes to industry gigs, this is something where a lot of people don't really know what to expect. They may just think that maybe the company is going to reach out to them on social media and say, hey, can you be this character that you already made at our booth? And that's usually not how it happens. Typically, there is a very short window of when the thing needs to be made. So I'm going to use, the example I'm going to use here is Baldur's Gate 3. So this is in 2020. Around the time of Katsucon in February, my friend Johnny Junkers, he's managing a project. He sends me some concept art and says, hey, I need some wigs. And he trusted me enough to send concept art that I won't leak on the internet. There's NDAs involved here. And he's like, do you have time to get these 2 wigs made for me for an upcoming event for PAX? And I was like, sure, yeah, I can do that. And I was just hired to do the wigs. He originally actually was asking if we could do the full costumes, and I'm like, there's no way, because we were still working full-time at ARDA at the time. So whatever I could do on the side was just stuff in my evenings or weekends. But he's like, okay, I'll figure out. He had other people to go to for making the costumes. And he's like, okay, so we have basically, it was a month to do all of this, but when you consider the planning time, sometimes there's a period of time where you have to obtain materials or get samples of materials, and it has to be approved by a company before you can even start on it, and maybe that's an entire week of your time. There's also like a fitting period and things like that. So sometimes you're looking at maybe a 2-week work time. It's very short. It's not ideal for someone who is potentially already working a full-time job. But it's also, there's definitely a lot of hustle culture happening, essentially. These are people who are looking for gigs. They know that they're potentially going to be doing something. They're trying to obtain a job for an upcoming con. So a lot of times, too, it might not be something you can do by yourself. You might need a team of people. And this was a case where we had a team collaboration happening, the short deadlines. But ultimately, like the people who are hired, they did have, someone who's a cosplay crafter and a modeler who did both Astarion and Shadow Heart's costumes. The Shadow Heart that's modeling here, she did the costumes for the 2 of them, and she knew a model friend to be Astarion. So she had a very short window. She did have an extra hand, like she had at least 1 or 2 people helping her make the costumes, but most of that work was her. I just did the wigs. I just shipped them off overnight to make sure they arrived in time for their final fitting. And then they premiered them at PAX. They flew out to PAX, and that was right before COVID.
A few years earlier, we had a friend, Ashley Riot, who was managing a project for Teppen. It was like a mobile, it was a Capcom mobile crossover game that had like Street Fighter and some other Capcom titles. I don't remember it had like Resident Evil and some others. But she had to make, I think it was like 5 characters. But it was like 3 or 4 copies of 5 characters for different people because they had multiple models throughout the weekend. This was at Anime Expo. Yeah, it was at Expo. And so she had to make like 18 costumes. And it was like within a couple months time frame. And so she came to us for just like tiny things. Like I made some belt buckles for the Dantes. Yeah, because I had Dante as one of the characters. Ryu, yeah, we did like vinyl cuts for characters, like the kanji on his belt, like really little things, But she's just like reaching out to lots of different people for little things, just so that she can get all these costumes made in time for this deadline. And like sometimes that's just how it is, like take what you can get.
Because sometimes these companies don't care if you're outsourcing additional help, as long as they are you are not breaking your responsibility. You have to have the trust in your friends to help you, because you have to trust that, because you can't break NDA, so they cannot break NDA. So whether or not you work out contracts yourself with these friends is up to you, but just things to think about. But ultimately, like with Ashley Riot, she's also one of those people who doesn't necessarily have the biggest social followings across the board, but what makes her get these gigs constantly is reputation. Again, going back to making sure you're on time, not drunk, you do a good job. Like the word, people talk. So those companies, Capcom will keep hiring her because they had a good experience. So like that's the most important thing, more so than numbers. Yeah. Having a website actually is great because like there's not something where they're looking at the numbers, they're looking at your portfolio, you know. AAA versus indie. So like people say, oh, well, I only want to do a gig if I get it from Nintendo or Square Enix. That's not how it works. You have to build up your reputation, potentially working for a small indie game. And not to say that they also are a bad idea, because a lot of times they pay really well. Cell phone games, like the mobile game industry, they actually have a good budget to work with. So you will get paid well as long as you make sure you are giving yourself the right rate of what you think your work is worth. Okay, so we'll go into reality check and mental health. This is important.
So running a business is a lot of work. That goes without saying. I mean, even just a regular job is a lot of work. Like, how many of you go home after work and you're just exhausted, right? So take that and then add on the fact that you're also the boss. You're managing the taxes. You have to worry about if you're getting paid or not because it's your own business. So it can get a little stressful sometimes. We always take a risk with this Etsy business because we don't know if it's going to be the same paycheck every week. I get a notification from my phone every time we get a sale, and I love that cha-ching noise. Like, if it goes off here, I'll let you know. But you know, it's always a nice little surprise. But we've had some slow months this year, and off the heels of last year being a crazy good year. So like, it was kind of a roller coaster of like a real high to a real low, and now it's doing pretty good again. So like, we're in the busy season again, but you just never know, and it depends on what you're doing, of course. As we covered, there's a lot of different things you can do for cosplay for a career, but if you're just doing a shop, you've got to be on top of product ideas and marketing. I'm honestly really terrible at the marketing part myself. Like, I don't like social media that much, and that's not a good thing for any kind of business. I'm just a little bit lucky that right now we have kind of a corner on a niche market. Like, the stuff I make, there's not a lot of other people making it, but it's popular, so we're selling it pretty well.
Going into, like, say you're not necessarily a crafter, but like you're a personality. Sometimes popularity is a double-edged sword. The more eyes that are on you, the more people are speculating and assuming, or assuming that in like watching your every move. And sometimes people will, out of jealousy, make some mean comments or assumptions about you when they don't actually know you. And I dealt with a lot of this in my early cosplay days, I guess. Like, I used to do YouTube videos, and I was more of a personality back then, and I kind of had to step away from it because it just wasn't for me. It wasn't something where I didn't want to feel like I had to cater to everyone else. I wanted to still do what I liked to do, and I kind of switched that off. And there's something you have to kind of think about. And the same goes if you're even a crafter. If someone doesn't like your product, they might go say some mean things about it, whether they leave a bad review or they just tell their friends, don't buy from me.
Yeah, a lot of times with a shop, you have to deal with product reviews or just customers and messages. And we're pretty lucky because we sell things to fellow crafters for the most part, so people understand what we're doing and where we come from. So they're a lot more patient and like they're a lot more thankful for the work that we do, which is great. But sometimes you get normies who don't know any better. They don't understand the kind of work that goes into things. They just look for the bottom line or the ended product, and you have to be able to deal with people like that who just don't appreciate your work. Yeah, thankfully we haven't had to put up with it too much, but the deeper you go, the more you're going to see it.
It's the starving artist reality. We kind of just talk about how, like, you know, the income fluctuates so much, and you never know if you're going to have a good month or not. That is the starving artist life. You are kind of, because there's so much uncertainty, you kind of, when you're even having a good month, you might be trying to save up a lot of money and be stingy even though it seems like things are good, because you want to make sure that when things slow down again that you're still stable, that you still can put food on the table. And there's been a lot of that. There's been, like, this year I had to get surgery and I will have to pay $4,000 in fees, and while we have money in savings, it would deplete our savings to go up front. So we have to be careful make sure there's money being set aside or have a payment plan that I know I can afford, regardless of how well we're doing, you know? Avoiding senpai notice me culture. I feel like going back into like the cosplayer dream of wanting to do something for your favorite company, there's a lot of cosplayers who will start getting this mindset of, oh, maybe a company actually did like your costume photo, or they shared it or something like that, and people get really excited, or they see someone else get shared and they're like, oh, I could maybe get shared too. I'm going to work harder to try to get them to notice me. And it kind of gets a little toxic at that point, because you are starting then to do it for, I feel like, for the wrong reasons. You're doing it for the clout, or you're doing it because you want the company to notice you or other people to notice you, rather than you doing it for yourself. You know, I think at the end of the day, to keep a more healthy relationship with cosplay, do what makes you happy for you, you know? And sometimes it's scary because people want to hop on trends. Sometimes the trends are what sells. Like, but at the same time, I think that there's value that comes from even the niche side. So like, you know, Genshin Impact is giant. Everyone is making Genshin Impact merch, and maybe you made something really cool and you get some good sales. But now it's an oversaturated market. And sometimes that's hard. Some people are actually doing the opposite because there's too much out there to choose from. So don't let that discourage you from doing the things that you like to do because you love the thing. If you want to cosplay from something from a 90s anime, but you feel like no one will appreciate it, that's a lie. I'm cosplaying from a 90s anime right now, and I'm getting tons of traction because it's so rare, you know. Like, do what makes you happy. Try not to do one genre of costumes just because you're trying to get that company to see it.
Yeah, I also think that like trends can be good for quick money if you know that you can pump something out quick for it. But if you know that you're a slower worker and you prefer quality over quantity, it's better to kind of have an idea of what niche things have longevity. So I really like FromSoft games like Dark Souls. They've been around for 10 years. They are still very, very popular. I could make something from Dark Souls, it would sell. It has that longevity. It's not just a trend. Like the Elden Ring stuff is more trendy, but it's also going to have longevity. Final Fantasy XIV has really good longevity. It's been going strong for a decade now. They've built up their reputation really well. World of Warcraft, like it or not, it's still around. You know, it still makes money. You know, Pokemon, if you can dodge the people trying to shut you down for it, you know, you do have to be careful about which properties are going to come after you, but largely a lot of cosplay is pretty safe. It's usually if you get into figures or jewelry that you really start getting taken down fast. But that is something to kind of do some research on.
I was going to say, I don't know if I actually touched that up, but that is something important to bring up, is that like if you're selling on Etsy, there are these bots that have been going around and basically submitting takedowns on things that use a lot of popular anime properties, like anything that's from like Crunchyroll, Marvel, Disney. They just track those tags, and a bot will send you basically a takedown or send a report to Etsy, and you might get flagged and your shop could be in danger if you get too many of those. And that's I think why Dangerous Ladies' shop is no longer on Etsy, is because they got too many takedowns, and they then were forced to have their own just website as be their main selling point, because there's not a human helping on Etsy's side. It's all like AI and customer service things. So like you really have to be careful about, typically with video games, I feel for the most part it is safer unless it's too much or it interferes with their own marketing. I haven't heard much in terms of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy does really well, partially because it's also free marketing for them. If a cosplayer can cosplay from the thing and help promote the game without them having to do anything. But you also get like, so for example, we did have a friend who was selling earrings. They were Aetheryte earrings from Final Fantasy XIV, but he was selling them around the time that Aetheryte earrings was a digital pre-order bonus for the new expansion. And because if you were to search Aetheryte earrings on Google, you're not getting the results of what they're trying to promote, and you're instead getting a product someone selling, that's when they're going to be like, I'm sorry, we need you to take this down because it's interfering with our marketing. But I think if he were to try to sell it now, it would not be a problem. So it just depends on the timing. Don't interfere with the company, but you can also use words that describe the item that isn't directly using those names too, and that can help a lot. Sorry, that was a lot of information.
Yeah. So moving on to work time in place. I imagine everyone here has struggled with like having the right mood to work on things before. We're not immune to it either. We still have our good days and our bad days, but what really helps is having a designated workspace. That can be tough if you're in an apartment or something, but like try to figure out a place that is your safe place for work, where you don't really have distractions, whatever your distraction is, whether that's TV or your phone. Find a place that minimizes those distractions and that you can easily focus on the work that you want to do, and start building habits of specific time that you go to that workspace to do the work, so that you don't have to really think about it as much. So we get up pretty early in the morning. I blame my cats. But we take a morning walk before it gets too hot out, and then we get cleaned up and we just go straight to work. And we work till afternoon. It's pretty standard, like 9 to 5-ish, but it just works for us. I don't really care what the norm is. It just works, But some days it's different, That's kind of the nice thing about having like working for yourself, is that you can kind of determine your own hours. If you're a night owl and your most productive time frame is like midnight to 4 a.m., do it, do what works for you. But that's what I would suggest, is get a workspace and find a habit, like a good time frame that works for you on the daily or the semi-daily. Don't feel like you have to work 40 hours a week. That's kind of toxic, honestly. I work like 30 to 35 on average, and then sometimes when I need to push myself more, I do, but it gives me a little more time to de-stress and think and work my way up to the next thing.
But by disciplining yourself on what is work time and what is your personal time, it's a little more, I think, something you can look forward to in the evenings, of being like, okay, this is from after 5 o'clock, it's me time, that I can do whatever I want, whether I'm crafting, and it's just like, but we do have our workspaces in our home, so we do have to be careful about so we usually go downstairs. The garage and the basement is mostly our shop space, and then upstairs we have more of the sewing and stuff. I'm not quite doing as much sewing right now for work. That's mostly the stuff that's downstairs, but I do come upstairs sometimes, because and that's the thing too, I separate what I do for work versus what I do for myself. So I kind of focus on these accessories that are kind of more, it's kind of therapeutic for me, because it's just a process that I go through. That is what I sell. I got really burnt out on wigs when I worked for a company doing wig work. It made it less fun for me to do on my own time. So I try to separate what I'm doing for work versus what I'm doing for fun, because that way I don't get tired of it. And that is I feel like that's like the biggest thing with burnout. Some people can do it. Some people are like, yeah, I love doing wigs and that's what I want to do for a living. But do those people still make wigs for themselves,
Yeah, I similarly avoid burnout by separating the kinds of projects I work on for shop versus cosplay, but there can be a lot of overlap in that. If you decide that you're going to make a costume and you can find an element of that can be reproducible easily, then that's a really good way to double your efficiency, because you're using time for developing a costume that's also developing a product. It doesn't have to be that way every time, so don't try to guilt yourself into doing it that way, but it can be convenient if it works out. I was also, what slide are we on?
The stuff down here?
Yeah. Sometimes you can kind of run into imposter syndrome. That can kind of go side by side with burnout, because when you're burnt out, you're not like in a good headspace to begin with. But imposter syndrome is basically like when you feel like
I was gonna say it's more related to something I've encountered. I've always I run into situations where I feel like, even though I am doing so much, am I doing enough? Am I working hard enough? If I compare myself with how other businesses are doing, and I'm like, what are we even doing? Like, why is this not working for us? And you run into all these questions, and I just want to say that is normal. It's something that everyone encounters. It doesn't matter. You can be successful, but still feel this way. And but I found that so far in this past year, what's been the most helpful for me is taking action rather than trying to put myself in a position where I just feel like, oh, woe is me. No, don't try to keep yourself there. Try to take action to do, like, I mean, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you're already feeling like you're doing so much, but even giving, sometimes I don't like overtime culture, but when I do push myself further, I get out of that bad headspace, and then I'm proud of my accomplishments when I can actually make a difference with it.
I'm going to say one more thing before moving on to the next slide, but kind of backtracking to burnout and also just kind of time management. I tend to get burned out really easily, which is, again, why we say to do your project work during work hours and don't feel like you have to extend your business stuff into your evening. You need a time to relax and chill so that you can recharge for the next day, and that's when you can play video games, watch TV or stuff, because that helps inspire you for new projects as well. But I definitely have times where I feel like I'm not doing enough, because sometimes I feel like I'm working too slow, and like I only get like one costume done in a year, if that, or like just one or two products done a year, and it really stinks. But I keep going because I know that I'm still taking steps towards those projects. So like, don't ever feel like you're not doing enough. In a worst case scenario, you can always pick up a second job somewhere, but don't give up the job that you want, unless you really feel like it's just not worth it. You know, keep trying, and you'll know eventually if it's really for you or not, but it's worth the struggle, in my opinion, because it's very satisfying.
It is kind of essential to have a social media presence to drug at as a marketing way of getting yourself out there, but don't let it run your life. Try to find a time where you are giving yourself to social media for your business, and then if you can, try to break away from it while you're working so that you can get more done, because it's easy to fall into that pit.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the not fun stuff. So business responsibilities include taxes and business expenses, marketing and branding. We're going to go into individual slides for all these, but a lot of that falls to me, so here we go. When you start getting into taxes for a business, it can be kind of scary at first, but it's not too crazy, honestly. You're going to do quarterly payments, basically. So when you have like an Etsy, we'll just use Etsy as an example. Etsy's pretty good because it can sync up to QuickBooks, and it can send QuickBooks all the information it needs. But if you don't have Etsy and you have like a different system, then you're going to want to keep track of the profit and the expenses, and you put both of those into either QuickBooks or give it to an accountant, and they'll figure out what your quarterly taxes will be based on the income versus the expenses. The fun part is when you go through QuickBooks or you go through with your accountant and you tell them all the things that you can deduct as a business expense. There are quite a lot of things that you can deduct as a business expense as a cosplayer, because it's all just tied into the crafting experience. Like, we can write this whole trip off as a business expense. Anything that we paid for that we were not reimbursed for, business expense. All of our costume materials, typically business expense. Anytime I get new tools from a hardware store, probably business expense, because more likely I'm going to use them on cosplay than I am on my house.
Let's say you're going out to dinner with another cosplayer and you're talking shop. That's a business expense. That's a client dinner. That is, or not a client, but like a business potential relationship. But we have a friend who they rented out a cabana at a Kalahari, and they basically hosted an event where all of their, because they do costume commissions they moved on to other things, but one of them did costume commissions for a living, and she invited her clients who had, she had done costumes for, as well as like other connections, like other cosplayers that are potential clients, and they had a great time, and that was a business expense because it was a social gathering with current and potential clients.
Even though we were all drinking in a pool. But, it is what it is. There's a lot of overlap. You don't have to feel guilty telling the government that you're having fun with your business, It doesn't have to be that way.
I mean, Obviously, be careful because you don't want to get flagged and to get an audit. But I mean, you want to be smart. You don't want to be spending all of your money on these fun things. You want to you still be actually making enough money to make a living. So
Yeah, like if you take a vacation, don't write 100% of your vacation off as a business expense. Be smart about it. If there's elements of a vacation that tie to your business that you can convincingly write off as a business expense, I think you should. But it's within reason. But there is a lot of things you can get away with. That being said, when you have a paycheck from from your business, you want to set a certain amount of it aside for either supplies or taxes. We do between 30 and 50% when we can. Sometimes you're going to have tight months and it won't perfectly line up. We're currently trying to rework the way we do our checkbooks and stuff, but for the most part, if you're just kind of automatically setting 30 to 50% aside for supplies and taxes, you're going to be in a pretty good spot.
it is very important to keep every receipt that you are marking as a business expense because they will, if you do get audited, they're going to ask for those receipts as proof. So again, we talked about like travel costs. This is your supplies, equipment. This is also like software subscriptions. If you use Photoshop to edit your photos that you sell prints of, that's a business expense. If you bought a sewing machine for your business, that is a business expense. However, just be careful that sometimes those audits will be like, well, are you also using this for personal? Now, because we do model our costumes at shows and that still ties in, yes, that's a business expense. However, like let's say you bought a computer for your business. If you were also using that computer to play games, you cannot mark that off as a full business expense. You have to split that. Again, just be kind of careful about what you can get away with. If you get a phone, if you buy a phone for your business, but you're also using it as your personal phone, that cannot be a business expense.
You can split it.
It's split it. Like you have to be careful about, like you have to calculate the percentage of what amount of time you use it for business versus the amount of time you use it for yourself. There's all these different rules and things you should be looking up, but if you have like an accountant or whatever, or a tax person, they can kind of guide you through that process.
So something to consider when you get into business, making a business for yourself is your marketing and your branding. Think of a logo. It can be a photo of you, but a graphic logo can go a long ways. I created my own graphic, the TurtleSmithy. I thought of an S in the shape of a turtle, and it also gives the S in Smithy, and then I made a hammer that's also a T for turtle. It's funny because they flip-flop. The T is not the image of the turtle, but it's the letter for the turtle, so there's like a lot of intermixing between the two. And I know not all of you may have a graphic art experience, but you might know people who are, and it's never too late to try to pick it up either, but there are a lot of companies out there who can help you as well. But having a little logo, something simple that really identifies who you are and what your goals are as a company is very helpful. Have ways that it can, like, try to make it in a simple size that can fit into different dimensions, like an icon size for all of your social media or a business card.
Okay, we're running short of time, so we're going to have to speed through some of this. But like ultimately, when it comes to getting your business out there, though, like having these marketing materials is something that will be a business expense to get. But like having a website, we're still working on ours. We've been doing this for so long, and yet we don't have a website yet. We're working on it, but we're now just trying to get the actual shop part of it set up. That's what's taking so long. But it's really great because you don't have to rely on Etsy, for the crafting side.
I'll say one thing that's been kind of difficult for us is that we've been cosplaying for almost 20 years, so all of the really old photos from early costumes are really hard to dig up. Most of those photographers don't do photography anymore, so we can't really ask for RAWs on those. So we're kind of limited to Facebook quality photos of the old costumes.
But what's great about having a website is that you could use, SEO and just things like that to kind of help make it so that you're searchable. Whereas if you post a costume photo of yourself on social media, if you try to find, like, Google yourself as, like, I'm searching Malindachan and let's say you say Fudo from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. I can find those photos because, like, places like DeviantArt still are great. Like, they'll hop up in searches, but social media platforms like Twitter and stuff, I can't find anything because after a certain amount of time, it's just like it's not searchable anymore. So like having a website, Yeah, evergreen content is what it's called, where you can easily find your things because it doesn't matter. It's, the website will help you do that.
Yeah, social media owns what you upload to it.
Yeah, and social media is still, though, important as a marketing tool, but you shouldn't rely completely on it, if that makes sense.
So you're probably wondering about pricing. If you're making a product or a costume commission, how do you go about pricing it? It's going to differ for everybody, but the TLDR is you want to price it in a way that you can live off of it. You don't undercut yourself because that leads to burnout really fast. I've seen a lot of people drop out pretty quick because they're not pricing things in a way that they can sustain. So what you want to consider is your material cost. That's the first thing. That's the absolute minimum, below minimum, but you want to know what it costs you to make it. And the material cost is the physical cost of the materials, but then you also have your time commitment. What does it take you time-wise to make the product or the costume or whatever? So have an hourly rate that's reasonable for you. You don't have to be shy about it. It doesn't have to be minimum wage or below. It can be $20 to $30 an hour, $40 an hour, whatever you think you're worth. And that can be negotiable. One nice thing about rates is that they don't have to be set in stone. It's the same when you do appearance fees. It's good to start yourself high because that means that you value yourself high. And then you can also say, in parentheses, negotiable. So that makes it like you're worth a lot, but you're also flexible. And that's a good impression to set, typically, if you've got the skill to back it up.
I was going to say, so it's funny, we have a lot of friends in the industry, and anytime I find out how much some of them make for their appearances and stuff, I'm like, what am I even doing? Because I was like, I always question it. Are we too much? Are we worth this amount per hour? And yes, if you feel you are worth it, then yes, you are worth it. Don't undercut, don't go to minimum wage. You are worth more than that. You are doing a specialty skill set.
Also, I remember like a really good quote from a book that talks about careers and stuff, and they said that like people who are kind of full of themselves and like fake a lot of things, that overconfidence really shows, but like people who are scared to death of like their own talent are usually pretty authentic. So if you don't really believe in yourself, that's actually a pretty good sign that you're probably pretty good and you're on the right track.
Let's see. Pro tips. So don't quit your day job right away. You don't know if you can self-sustain off of and again, you might be working overtime technically to balance what you're doing for your cosplay part of the business versus your real job. Again, but a lot of that is going to be upfront costs. Like you're going to be saving up the side money to go back into your business so that you can see where you're going and can I sustain myself on this eventually full time. But don't go straight into it without a plan. Healthcare.gov is where you're probably going to be getting your health insurance. And thanks to the Affordable Care Act, I can afford health insurance as is self-employed. I go there every fall and I have to pick out a plan. And because of the bracket, like we're not making, basically the income the two of us make together is kind of like one person's income. It's not a lot. But because we're in a lower bracket, we get a nice tax credit towards health insurance. And so we're paying $16 a month for our health insurance right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Affordable Care Act.
And when we're able to still kind of work with a single person's income because a lot of our personal expenses are also business expenses because our hobbies are also our job. So it's a bit of a cheating system. Like we can write off a lot of business expense with the stuff that we're having fun with. But again, like we said earlier, within reason. There's some things I'm not going to write off video games as an expense. You could make an argument that it's research material, but you're taking a little bit of a chance there.
Yeah. Ultimately, they're like, well, are you actually making money off of the thing you do? And it's like, well, we do have to make costumes to keep ourselves like out there and relevant as teachers and stuff and personalities. And so like that is part of the business, you know.
So one subscription to Final Fantasy 14 is fine.
We don't put Final Fantasy 14 as a we probably could, but we don't. Within reason, trying to be reasonable here. Oh yeah, we talk about, so what is an LLC? It's like an official business like step, like but there are differences. We're technically still a sole proprietorship, which is that, yeah, it's like, so because we don't have employees and things like that. It's just the two of us.
Yeah, the main reason you would want to form an LLC is if you have enough stock of like supplies, business assets, and you're afraid of losing them if something goes wrong. So let's say we sold something that had potential danger to it, like something that's like extremely flammable or acidic, something that can harm a person, and then somebody figured out how to harm themselves with that something and then tried to sue us. If they successfully sued us and we owed more money than we personally had, then we would have to get rid of assets that we own to help as collateral, like our house, like our car, like all of our shop equipment. If you have an LLC, that basically makes all of your business-related materials and costs and value cover whatever suing could happen over business-related stuff. So somebody tries to sue you for something business-related. The worst that could happen is that your company goes bankrupt, but your personal stuff is still safe. Usually it's not really a huge deal for small entities like us, so we don't worry about it quite yet, but the bigger you get, the more you want to consider it.
I mean, it's probably more relevant, especially for businesses, or like maybe you're selling something like a food item or something that could endanger someone for real. Like, I would hope that no one tries to kill themselves with a pair of foam dragon horns, but I don't know. Okay, so do the thing. Our business, right now, we do have a domain, TurtleSmithy.com, which directs directly to our Etsy shop. Once our website's up and running, we're going to redirect our domain name to our website. Look into getting a business name that is going to be unique to you and searchable, and claim that domain for yourself as soon as you can.
Claim it everywhere. Make every social media with that name, even if you never use it. Because if you don't, somebody else will.
I know we kind of took up the full entire time slot, but we do have a couple minutes. Does anyone have any urgent questions that they need absolutely answered right now? And if not, you are welcome to go to TurtleSmithy.com and send us a DM to ask us your questions.
You can also reach out to us on social media, and we have a Gmail account. It's turtle.smithy@gmail.com. You can reach out to us at any of these for questions if you have them. Thanks, everybody.